Hello and welcome to helpyourmath.com. In this video, we're going to look at solving proportions and writing the answer as a decimal rounded to an indicated place. Before we get started on solving proportions, let's review what is a proportion. A proportion is an equation in which two fractions are set equal to each other. So at the most basic level, it could be something like 1/2 is equal to 2/4. And this is a true equation because 1/2 is the same value as 2/4. When we're asked to solve a proportion, that means that we have an unknown somewhere in part of the proportion. So whether it's a numerator or a part of a numerator or a numerator and denominator. So it might look something like x over 2 is equal to 7 over 15, where we want to determine the value of x. It can get more complicated and we could have, x plus 7 over 3x minus 4 is equal to 7 over 15. But for this video, we're only going to look at just having a single unknown numerator or a single unknown denominator. How can we solve a proportion? The most common method is to use the cross products. So if you have a true proportion, I'm going to go back to my example of 1/2 is equal to 2/4, then one thing that's true about the proportion is that cross products are equal to each other. What are the cross products? That's when you take the numerator of one fraction and multiply it to the denominator of the other. So we would have 1 times 4. And that equals the numerator of the other fraction and the denominator of the one fraction. So 1 times 4 is equal to 2 times 2. This says that 4 is equal to 4. That's a true story. So we know that the cross products are equal to each other. So typically what we do is we will determine the cross products and then solve for the missing piece or the variable. Before we look at examples, one more thing. Let's look at some tips for rounding decimals. The place to which to round should be indicated. So it might say the 10th place, which is 1 digit behind the decimal point. So this is our 10th place. It might say the 100th place, which would be the second place behind the decimal, the 1000th place, so on and so forth. So it should tell us which place to round to. It might say the nearest 10th, the nearest 100th, the nearest 1000th. It could even say the nearest whole number, which means that we would not include a decimal in the rounded answer. Prepare to include one place past the indicated place to round. So if we're rounding to the nearest 10th, we need to know the value of the 100th place to decide what the 10th place should be. Or if you are asked to round to the nearest 100th, you need to know the 1000th place to indicate what the 100th digit should be. When we're rounding, if the digit in the position 1 decimal smaller than the place you're rounding to is between 0 and 4, then we're going to leave that digit as it is. So if we're rounding to the nearest 10th, like up there, if we have this, and it says round to the nearest 10th, this digit in the 100th place is between 0 and 4, so it tells the 10th place to stay as is, meaning that 0.123 would round to 0.1. If the digit in the position 1 smaller than the decimal place in which we are rounding is between 5 and 9, then we bump that digit up 1. So if we have 0.173, the 7 here tells the 1 to bump up, meaning that this value here is closer to 2/10 than it is to 1/10. And a special case, if the digit to be rounded is a 9, then it bumps up the next digit too. So if we have 0.97 and we're rounding to the nearest 10th, the 7 tells the 9 to bump up 1, but 9 is the largest digit. So then what happens is we then go to the next place over the units place, and that gets bumped up. So this would become 1.0, and then we would drop the 7 because we were rounding. So what would happen here is basically what it's saying is that 97 hundredths or 0.97 is closer to 1.0 than it is to 9/10, or this would be 10/10. And lastly, if you are asked to round and the answer ends before the indicated place, it is common we include a 0 for that place. So for example, if it says round to the nearest 10th, but you get an answer of 70, notice that there's no decimal in the number 70. That's a whole number. If it says round to the nearest 10th, it's pretty common that you want to include the 10th place. So we would just say that the nearest 10th would be 70.0, and we would deal with that. Okay, let's move on to some examples. We are going to solve for x and then round to the nearest 10th. So what I like to do is I like to look at the cross products. That means that I'm going to do 28 times 7. And based on the fact that this is a proportion, 28 times 7 must equal 8 times x. So now I have a few things going on here. I probably want to multiply 28 times 17 first, but I don't have to. What I can do is I can leave that alone for the time being and get x by itself. To get x by itself is being multiplied by 8. To undo that, I can divide by 8. Now, you might be saying to yourself, what? Why isn't she multiplying? Here's why. Because now that I'm dividing the left-hand side by 8, I can actually simplify before I multiply and make my life a little bit easier. You don't have to do this. If you want to multiply and then divide by 8, you can, but I like doing less work, so I'm gonna see what I can do. So I have two factors in the numerator, 28 and 17. 8 and 28 have a common factor of 4. So I can divide 4 into 8 and give me 2. I can divide 4 into 28, which would give me 7. Now, it's just smaller numbers for me to work with. So now I have 7 times 17 over 2. I'm going to multiply 17 times 7. So 17 times 7. 7 times 7 is 49. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 4 is 11. So 7 times 17 is 119 divided by 2 equals x. Because it says round to the nearest tenth, that indicates to me that I actually need to do this division. So I'm going to put 119 inside the division, 2 outside, and it says round to nearest tenth. So if I want to, I can add 2 zeros because I would need to know what's in the hundredths place to decide what should go in the tenths place. Move the decimal point straight up, and then we divide. 2 goes into 1 0 times, 2 goes into 11 5 times, 2 times 5 is 10, then we subtract. 11 minus 10 is 1, bring down the 9. 2 goes into 19 9 times, and 2 times 9 is 18. 19 minus 18 is 1. Bring down the 0. 2 goes into 10 5 times. Minus 10, we get 0. Bring down the 0 in the hundredths place. 2 goes into 0 0 times. So actually this worked out that 2, we don't actually need to round because the decimal actually stopped at the tenths place. So we're good. We don't have to round. Or, I have the 0 in the hundredths place to say, hey, tenths place, stay the same. So we can say here that x is equal to 59.5. Generally, when I round, I say approximately, and I use squigglies instead of the equal sign because that's how we indicate approximately. But in this case, x was exactly 59.5, so I get to leave my answer like that. Next example. Okay, so we have some decimals to deal with. If we want to deal with the decimals now, we can. If we want to wait, we can wait a minute. And we can deal with them in just a second. So let's see, if we look at the cross products first, we're looking at 3 and 5 tenths times 4 and 2 tenths, and that's going to equal the other cross product, 12 times h. Again, we can try to simplify first, but since I did that last time, this time I won't. This time I'll do the multiplication first, and then I'll divide by 12. So we need to know what 3.5 times 4.2 is. So I'm going to come over here, 3.5 times 4.2, 2 times 5 is 10, 2 times 3 is 6 plus 1 is 7. Down here we have 4 times 5 is 20, 4 times 3 is 12 plus 2 is 14, and we end up with 1470. There's 2 places behind the decimal points in the factors, so I move this over twice, giving me 14.7, and that makes sense. 3 point something times 4 point something should equal 4, around 12, a little bit more than 12. Okay, so I feel pretty good that I put the decimal point in the right place. I can drop that end 0. I don't need it right now. This equals 12 times h. Divide both sides by 12. And what are we doing? We're rounding to the nearest hundredth. Okay, so we're going to set this up. We're going to have 12 outside. Oh, you know what? I'm going to go over here because this is division. And 14.7 goes inside. I'm rounding to the nearest hundredth, so I'm going to take this out to the thousandths place. Move the decimal point straight up, and now we divide. 12 goes into 14 one time. 14 minus 12 is 2. Bring down the 7. 12 goes into 27 2 times. 12 times 2 is 24. We're going to subtract. 27 minus 24 is 3. Bring down the 0. 12 goes into 30 twice, and 2 times 12 is 24. 30 minus 24 is 6. Bring down the 0. 12 goes into 60, actually goes exactly 5 times. So this actually is the entire answer. The entire decimal would be 1.225, but it says to round to the nearest hundredth. The 5 in the thousandths place is telling the 2 in the hundredths place to do what? To bump up. So here we're going to say h is approximately, it's not exact, it's approximately 1.23 or 1 and 23 hundredths. Our next example, we're dealing with some complex fractions, but don't panic. We're going to get through this together, okay? I got you on this. Okay, first thing we're going to do is we're going to just set up our cross products. This would be 1/9 times n is equal to the other cross product, 1/8 times 56. Do you want to go ahead and deal with the fraction and the multiplication now? Yeah, you do? Okay, good. So do I. What we're going to do is we're going to just separately deal with 1/8 times 56. When we're multiplying and one factor is a fraction, let's turn all factors into fractions. So we'll put 56 over 1. Can I simplify before I multiply? Absolutely. 8 goes into itself once, and it goes into 56 7 times. Now when we multiply straight across, we get 7 over 1, which equals 7. So what we have now is we have 1/9 times n is equal to 7. Okay, we need to get n by itself, and it's being multiplied to a fraction. The best thing that we can do is we can clear out the fraction by multiplying by its reciprocal. The reciprocal of 1/9 is 9 over 1, which is also equivalent to 9. So I can multiply both sides by 9. That's going to cancel, giving us 1 times n, which is just n. On the other side, we have 7 times 9, which is 63. Now, the directions do say round to the nearest tenth. So even though this ended before the tenths place, this is where we want to include a tenths place. To include a tenths place, we're going to add a decimal point, and we're just going to put a 0 there to indicate that there were no tenths. Since this is exact, I keep the equal sign as an equal sign, and our final answer is n is equal to 63.0, or 63 and no tenths. In our last example, we are solving for w, and we want to round to the nearest tenth. Let's set up our cross products. So first cross product, we have 1/12 times w equals, and then here we have 1.5 times 20. You want to go ahead and multiply first? Good choice. So we're going to look at 1.5 times 20. I'm going to hope that sometimes the screen goes a little wonky here, so I'm going to do 1.5. Oh, it looks really smooth over here. Good. The 0 we don't have to do anything with, so I'm going to start here. 2 times 5 is 10. 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3. There's 1 place behind the decimal point, so we move this over once. And let's rewrite our proportion. We have 1/12 times w is equal to 30.0, which we can just say is 30. To get w by itself, do you remember what we did in the last example to clear out that fraction? We multiplied both sides by the reciprocal of the fraction. The reciprocal of 1/12 is 12 over 1, or just 12. So I'm going to multiply the fraction by 12 over 1 and the whole number by just 12. These cancel, giving us 1 times w, which is w. And over here we have 30 times 12. Well, 3 times 12 is 36. So 30 times 12 will be 360. And it's exact again. So what do we do when it says round to the nearest tenth? We're just going to add the tenths place by putting a 0 there. And we have w is equal to exactly 360.0. These have been examples of solving proportions and rounding our answer to an indicated place. Thank you for stopping by.